We are starting this webinar and I'm hitting record. We'll give it 1 second for YouTube to catch up. And we're live. Good morning, everybody. My name is Eric Johnson, and I'm here with my buddy Eric Garland. Hey, Eric.
Good morning.
Happy Julian New Year, or Gregorian New Year.
Happy Gregorian New Year.
Love
to
it.
all who celebrate.
Well, we are here on January 3rd, 2022, and we're closing the distance again after the last 10 days or so of Eric and our buddy Monica Nixon helped me keep my promise to myself. And that this is the last time I'm going to mention it, actually, Eric, before we sort of get into our regular rhythm here in 2022. But a year ago, I promised myself that I would relaunch a webinar series that I ran in the summer of 2020 called Close the Distance, which was really an analysis of changes that were happening in our macro environment and how that change process was being interpreted, or in many cases misinterpreted, by those in authority and with control that they wanted to project into their own spheres of influence. And so that came to an end late last year, 2020. And I was in such grief mode over it that I asked Eric and Monica to help me relaunch it. And they were bold enough to help me do that just as everyone was taking the rest of the year off. And so on December 21st, 2021, we came back with Close the Distance, the live stream edition. And as we sort of build out what this show will be, I've got some thoughts on exactly how this agenda will flow here, Eric, that I'll be sharing with you after I unplugged over the weekend and had a chance to kind of organize my thoughts here. But I am eager to get this conversation started today and have a relatively short conversation about our industrial agenda for 2022. And when I say industrial agenda, what industries do you think will be most important for decision makers, particularly from the business world, to understand and interpret and be able to anticipate for the year ahead? By the way, tell us who you are, because our audience may not know who you are. So, quick intro.
My name is Eric Garland. I'm an intelligence analyst, linguist, and mouthy bassist.
I can vouch for that.
From that, yes, all those things can confirm. Yeah. So, what to look at this year on the manufacturing front? Was that it?
Industry in general, and when I think industry, I'm thinking not just manufacturing and sort of finished goods, but all of the service industries as well, where government fits in filling gaps that industry is not to fill.
Can I rewind to a gig I did in 2017? I gave a keynote for the Wall Street Journal CEO Summit in Washington, D.C. at the Four Seasons. And it was about shifts in globalization. And it all boiled down to this. I'm like, you're not citizens of the world. You belong to nation states. Nation states are still the main, they're still the main unit of analysis for international relations. And basically your company got to start in a country, and it does deals with other countries or within other countries, but you got to pick a country, because you, my friend, you are not as global as you think you are. And then I started throwing up some stuff about data hacks. I believe Vladimir Putin's face, emerged onto the screen, and we might have mentioned the Chinese Communist Party. And I was giving everybody a heads up, because that's what I do in foresight. My specialty in intelligence is strategic foresight intelligence. Hopefully I do that in advance, and I do it in advance. I do it pretty well. I was like, hey, because this was incidentally the place where Admiral Rogers of the National Security Agency announced for the first time in public, which was nuts, that there had been foreign interference in the 2016 U.S. election. And they had me as the next breakfast keynote. I was like, head of the NSA, me, totally makes sense. But I got in there. I'm like, so all this cyber stuff and all the supply chain's going to change, guys. And your responsibility to the nation that you live in, that forms the legal structure, the banking structure, and you got to pick a home. All this unchecked globalization is coming to an end. Think about it. I didn't have any specifics on you must do this or that. It was a general, like, we've crossed the Rubicon here in a lot of ways, because of the Russian Federation being so obvious about their interference in our politics. Now, in reality, Russia's been doing this for 100 years, and America's had its, has matched pitch as well. But I thought we were crossing the Rubicon, and man, we're there. So I think the industrial trend, like, I find it very interesting on the manufacture of semiconductors and whatnot, how much some of our leaders have been talking about how many new plants for semiconductors we gonna be building, we're gonna be making the plants in the United States. How China is being locked out of, either receiving some of the higher end products, and they're going to be no longer make some of these other products because people don't want to put their stuff, the Chinese manufactured, like semiconductors, for example, or other hardware that might, have been discovered to intentionally have backdoors in it for years. That cutesiness being part of the global supply chain, but we're also planning to cut you out of this, or, all our, buy our products and get economic espionage for free. That was always untenable. Was never going to be eternal, right? There was, at some point, somebody was going to have to go, okay, you can do that. That's fine. Or they were going to go, no more. And we hit the no more point here.
Yeah. So
that's how I see it.
Just to parse that a little bit. And I'll also say, as an intelligence analyst myself, who finds myself ahead of my time, occasionally I'm guessing those CEOs circa 2017 were not necessarily convinced by your arguments, because from their point of view above the waterline, everything appeared to be trending towards a deepening globalization rather than a retraction or retreat from globalization as a trend, which is where we look. We look below the waterline and see the iceberg that is about to rip the hull open on your battleship or cruise liner, as the case may be, I think, for most of those CEOs. So I'm guessing they didn't necessarily agree with you. Is that a safe assumption?
Well, not necessarily. In fact, I can't, I couldn't see in the mind of every audience member, never can. But I know general reactions. I like to tell people about how the career of intelligence goes. I've been thrown out of more boardrooms than you've ever been in. And Same. That was not the vibe here. Now, and why do we get thrown out? Or otherwise defenestrated? Is that, you've said something that is what they exactly paid you for, which is to upset the apple cart. It's like, tell us something we don't know. Scare us a little. I mean, I've literally not literally, make it sound like this happened one time. No, multiple times you get told, please come in and shake up my people. Tell them yet. And then you do. And then they get very angry about it. This is all part of the masochistic intellectual beauty that is being in intelligence. Why do we do it? I guess the only thing I'm too dumb about is to do anything else. But anyhow, I'm at the Wall Street Journal CEO Summit, and I kind of wondered, I'm like, all right, how are they going to take this? Because let's be honest here. What has been the trend is the trend has been our offshore banking regimes, our tax evasion regimes, the money stops for a vacation in Guernsey, then goes to Jersey, then Ireland, then down to Panama, then we negotiate with the Treasury on whether we should, how much we'll pay if we do repatriate it, all that stuff. Plus, hey man, we can order our products from anywhere, and it's all going to be equally good, and yeah, there's some ugly regimes, but aren't there always? they would be forgiven for believing that that gravy train would roll on forever and ever. And I'm sure some of them did kind of, the reception was actually extremely warm. The fact that they hired a guy like me for a gig like that, I was kind of shocked because I was deep in the midst of being a controversial figure. I was getting pummeled in the mainstream media, which I never featured there outside of writing some prescient articles for the Atlantic about how offshore banking was going to get blown up, which that turned out okay. Outside of appearing as an expert to be quoted or a writer in my own right, I was never in the mainstream media. But I had said, hey, we had some foreign interference, and some set of forces, man, the PR came out and was like, this guy's bananas. He's a fruitcake. You can't listen to him. And yet the Wall Street Journal said, let's put that fruitcake in front of these CEOs. So maybe they were hedging their bets a little bit. I don't know. I appreciate the gig. And they, the hosts were extremely gentlemanly, and it was a fascinating experience. I got the sense some of the real good CEOs they're going to be the decision maker at the end of the day, but they got multiple scenarios in mind. If we're doing anything correctly, and if they're any good, they'll listen and go, huh. And if you tell them something extreme, they go, I'm going to just file that away right here. That was kind of the feeling I got, because I didn't tell them, you better slap a Canadian flag or a U.S. flag on all your products today. I didn't say that. I'm just like, so, when I'm breaking news, I'm like, putting up Vladimir Putin and some this and that is like, this might not hold because we're crossing some lines here and some borders. So I thought that.
There's your qualifier. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there's your criterion difference. If they're any good, and let's define that for a second. That's a really, really important, differentiator for a leader in that role. Executive leadership is mostly, and I'm going to, by the way, this is why I'm unemployable in real work. And it's because I have no appreciation for other people's feelings and how those feelings might have to be sacrificed sometimes in order for them to understand what's really going on. You have the same problem, but you have your own, twist on it. That's why we're friends, by the way, is because we don't really give a shit. and so anyway, point being, most executive leaders are not really very humble. And I wear this t-shirt today. I have a t-shirt collection, as you may know, among other things that I collect. And the notion of humility is a prerequisite for intelligence to have a yield. This is one of my principles of the work that we do. In the absence of humility, it is impossible for intelligence to have a yield. And the yield potential of intelligence is always based on the actionability of the insights. How actionable are the insights that we're producing? Now, your audience, and the reason I'm lingering on this is because I think it's going to be a criterion for our audience in Close the Distance. The ability for you to humble yourself to all of your mistakes, miscalculations, and erroneous assumptions about reality is the definition of humility in the context of an actor. And those actors have power that they project into their macro environment on behalf of the stakeholders that they serve. Now, most CEOs are actors that fall into a category that I call operators. They are operators of businesses and corporations that operate sub-businesses and value chains across those organizations that sometimes we refer to as the supply chain. But more specifically, the value chain is how value is improved and increased at each step along the progress of whatever it is that's being produced. And so operators are the people who are incentivized to maximize the financial returns of the operation. Now, that's a very specific type of stakeholder that is the traditional intelligence client. There are actually three other categories of stakeholders that have to be taken into account in order to project that power in a reliable way. Number one are the beneficiaries of the operation. Customers traditionally are the traditional stakeholder beneficiaries that you would look to and understand how they'll reward the market with share based on their unique superiority criteria. The second are the benefactors, the people who are really creating the industrial structure, the markets, the flows and stocks of economic inputs that are coming in and out of that particular sector, allowing that sector to be productive. And then finally, there are the competitors. Now, there are competitors. The competitors are the fourth type of stakeholder that operators typically regard as hostile, but which in fact are not hostile. They share a stake in the same future that the operator has a stake in. And if you are able to neutralize their competitive instincts and convert them to an ally or a partner, ultimately you can create a more nuanced understanding of how your particular sector operates. And that's something that I'm going to really try and focus us in on here in 2022 is what is the hidden operational posture of the operators, beneficiaries, benefactors, and competitors who exist within their macro environment, because it's ultimately how they make choices that will determine your ability to successfully project your power with and against them. Anyway, my short soliloquy on stakeholder analysis has concluded.
I mean, in a lot of ways, your competitors are the only people that know the world from a similar perspective as you, right?
Exactly.
I mean, would you not say, like, with a few notable exceptions who are kind of noxious in the competitive intelligence world, there are people who exist in the same market space, but we're not enemies. The enemies are desire to remain ignorant. The enemy is the idea that there's no information that I can take in and pay money for that would affect my quarterly, earnings per share that really determines the future of the company. That's the enemy. Yep. And if you meet people who have similar value propositions, they're certainly not enemies. And of course, we're a tight-knit crew and general. And you never know who you're going to be working for with. Who might become. It might be a competitor today, leaves his firm, goes to a client firm, a large corporation, and is now someone to be wooed. So one of the things I love about our industry's interaction. But so are the people who? What's that?
Go ahead with your question. I have an observation in a second, but I'll let you finish.
So would. We see a lot of people who are, who may even be selling the same proposition out into the world and accepting money for this service. I think we may have kind of a best-in-class standard. Maybe physicians would be similar. Like nephrologists are not like, yo man, like there's no rap beef amongst dentists and nephrologists generally. It's like, man, I do teeth better than anyone. He's a punk. He's afraid of me. It's like, there's a lot of teeth out there. Generally the town's big enough for everybody. But if you take I think if you get out of some of the early Genghis Khan based competitive strategy notions, you remember like kind of the 1980s, Gordon Gekko, everyone's reading Sun Tzu and not understanding him and all that. And, there are these very football game or, martial warlike perspectives. All that does is draw your attention away from the macro environment. And it assumes a stability in the macro environment that, okay, nothing around us is going to change. Therefore, that other firm over there, that company that's offering this thing that's similar to ours, since, our enemy is not our ignorance, our lack of foresight on the regulatory environment, the ecological environment, or money supply available, the role of financial firms like private equity and hedge funds at rolling up our industry or creating new if you stay focused on just the competitor you think is your competitor, and you have a totally adversarial mindset, you have to almost give up by definition all the rest of that information about the macro environment, because you're assuming it's going to be stable. Otherwise, you wouldn't get so completely obsessed when you're company A with company B. You'd be like, all right, they're there. They're there, but this is what's changing. We might not do business with China anymore.
Yeah, so there's a ton there. And I want to rewind just a second to talk about humility again, because you described this a few minutes ago, the primary qualifier for me in working with new clients. Now, I don't know what your qualifiers are, but you can get into them here if you like or not. But for me, there has to be a high humility quotient, HQ. And I know that there's a high humility quotient if there's anything I can tell them that they don't already know. And I'll tell you this, if there's nothing I can tell them they don't already know, then there's a very low yield potential for me as an intelligence analyst to make any sort of difference in the outcomes that they're trying to produce. And frankly, I probably am not interested in working with them. Now that is the thesis. That's my thesis, and I think it's yours too. The antithesis is competitive intelligence is about taking share from your direct competitor and putting it on your own profit and loss statement, which is also productive. It's just very short-sighted. And though we also need to compete day to day, and that's by and large the incentive structure for chief executive officers. And I think the thing that makes them dumb, by the way, the indemnifying, I think I just invented a new word, which is one of my favorite things to do. Indemnifying.
I'm here for it.
All right. Indemnifying instead of indemnifying. It's the indemnifying quality of the incentive structure for a lot of executive pay, which is, I'm going to pay you $20 million to move 2 percentage points of market share from that company over to our balance sheet. And everything the company then does is based on that incentive structure and that incentive structure alone. And I think from a governance standpoint, we're discovering that that's not necessarily how executives should project the power of shareholders into the markets that they serve and the industries that they try and operate in. The real definition of leadership is the ability to humble one's own assumptions and desires, baser desires, and even emotional drivers in order to serve the people who they've been invested with authority to serve. And that element of service as an executive, that's something that really turns me on, quite frankly, when I've got the opportunity to work with somebody new in a leadership position. If I see that they are unhumble, I'm going to probably send them to my worst enemy, and they can go ahead and pay them to be a pain in the ass. And if I see that there is yield potential, high HQ, there are things I can teach them that they don't already know. And in fact, there are going to be things that they will willingly teach me as part of the social contract of being a consultant in the work that we do. Then that's a very, very attractive client for me at this stage in my career, which, by the way, in my advanced age of my early 50s, I don't suffer fools much anymore. And I don't know that you do either. Anyway, end of soliloquy number 2.
But I got to tell you, now I want to write a, do you like pina coladas? I'm taking walks in the rain. I want to do that for intelligence clients.
Yeah.
like what is it? What would you put in the personals ad? Like,
yeah.
I don't know.
Not into yoga, has half a brain.
Thinks Michael Porter was superseded by Clayton Christensen in terms of innovation as a factor in the 5 forces. I don't know. They're going to be tricky lyrics, but
I am from that school of thought, by the way. But I have renewed respect for Porter. In my 40s, I spent a lot of time realizing really how brilliant, the competitive strategy concept in the 1980s was necessary and was rewarded because it was necessary not because of China, but because of Japan. Japan was mopping the floor with the United States. And the consequences of that were we created this thing called competitive intelligence because big companies were oblivious. I won't say ignorant because that's not quite right. They were oblivious to the changes happening around them. And your citation of Gordon Gekko as one of the, I'll say, totems of the financialization movement. We financialized our industrial base through all of the debt instruments. And you talked about private equity. And I think it's a little more nuanced than that, that private equity, I know a lot of PE people and VC people for that matter, who are profit as a byproduct of value creation driven. I don't know what to call that mindset, but it's a different mindset. There is the traditional, and I think the default mindset is incorrectly slandered as being capitalist, so to speak. And I think that's why we've misunderstood what capitalism is. And in particular, that the U.S. is currently a capitalist country. We are not, by the definition of the Austrians. But I will say that the predatory capitalist, who is driven largely by wealth extraction and wealth transfer, that is very part and parcel with a lot of where the big public equity and venture capital world thinks of their role in society is they are vampiric. They exsanguinate money from the industries that they target. And the opposite viewpoint or point of view or mindset from that is those of us who believe that profit is a byproduct of value creation. And though making money is easy, frankly. Making money is really easy. It's really simple. The ability to make money while also having a moral true north and serving that moral true north, whatever yours might be, that's the trick.
A phrase that just came to mind, because I think we need a way to describe this for people, is we have pseudo-market socialism.
That's good.
At least in some critical spots. Like, if you're able to vampirically exsanguinate just the liquid cash out of some industry, leave it in shambles, move on to the next one, intentionally indebt it, intentionally reduce its balance sheet to where it qualifies to be capitalized via junk bonds, when the company is not junk when you find it. And then to aggregate all of that in these larger financial organizations, and there's about a dozen of them. And one of them, it's funny, Monica mentioned she works for one and doesn't want to be mixed up with the other. I'm just going to say it does show up on that list. I think that skirts the defamation rules there. Also still true. There's a few of these financial behemoths that aggregate all that at the top and then blow themselves up and on purpose, more or less, and then run to the federal treasury and then get it. Or at least they've gotten every time they've asked for it in the last 20 or so years. And without a lot of, what's that on your shirt, humility. Yep. They're not humble about it. They're like, yep, we knew. Well, if you want to retire, okay, then I guess you'll pay us off. I mean, it's like, hey, I like it better in Sicilian. I like my mob shakedowns where there's a plausible chance of, gabagool and, good red sauce. That's how I like my mob shakedowns. Anyhow, that ain't capitalism, baby. That is pseudo market socialism mixed, with steroided up predatory behavior.
Yeah. So I sent around.
I'd love to try capitalism.
I'm sorry. Say that one more
time. Capitalism would be fun. I'd love to try capitalism.
Yeah. There is this world of the anarcho-capitalist movement that I find, really intriguing. I don't think I quite fall into that definition yet, but there's a lot of philosophers out there who would say that government is the problem. I think that's an oversimplification. I think it's collusion. That's the problem. The ability to exploit oblivious stakeholders. There again, I use the word oblivious rather than ignorant because they're not dumb. They are not completely ignorant of what's happening. It's that they refuse to see. They refuse to see with our same eyes. And that's, I think, a big part of what intelligence analysis is about. We see with different eyes what's really happening. And when you understand what's really happening, the smoke clears. It's not hidden any longer by, the narratives. That's a big part of this culture that we're going to have to try and figure out on this show, by the way. How do we convey the true consequences of a culture committed to truth, as opposed to a culture committed to the incentive structure that's been put in place to reward those who project power? That's our windmill that, in true Don Quixote style, I think we'll be tilting at here in the year ahead.
Well, it's funny when you say government's the problem. Now, a lot of that crazy financialization came, if we're going to invoke Gordon Gekko, we got to look at, the Reagan era that came up in. And Reagan had some of his slogans and, that we're going to get government off people's backs. And, the scariest 4 words, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. That's not 4 words, but you take my point. Who thought, and this is further to pseudo-market socialism, who thought that exact thought was Adam Smith, father of capitalism, father of capitalistic thinking. And what was he against? Mercantilism. Mm-hmm. Now you had aristocracy and monarchy in England and the UK, and he's like, there's a bunch of people supposedly conducting business in this economy who have special letters of marque from the monarch, and they have this position where they they're not subject to market forces here. And he was railing against the problem that they had the backing of government, and so this whole idea of the invisible hand or market forces taking care of themselves and guiding R&D and innovation at the same time, which at that period of time in Scotland, when he was writing, the Scots were inventing quite a bit. And, in the agriculture sector and the manufacturing sector, a lot of it came from Scotland. So, he was thinking about, he was in a perfect place to think about the genius of just kind of letting people build a better mousetrap, all that classic stuff. He saw the government then being the monarch, he saw that as the enemy of that. Not that it was, and he lived in a prosperous kingdom, so it's not that the system didn't work, but the other part of that book, the wealth of nations and the theory of moral happiness, the theory of moral sentiments, he was concerned with happiness in society. He thought if you have more market forces and more responsibility on the local level, like you can, if the local guy, the local rich dude is corrupt, you can make that guy's life miserable because you live near him. But if you're in some sprawling empire and some government agency, whether it's in London or DC or whatever, some sprawling, bureaucracy decides who's going to conduct business in the world and how, and they're going to get a guaranteed, income from it no matter what. He's like, that sucks, and people will be unhappy. So yet again, the idea of, having government not protect people from the consequences of their actions as a corporation, or as, wealthy, stakeholders or whatever. We have yet to really try it now, or we haven't for a while. Maybe Teddy Roosevelt had some of that thesis, and FDR had some of that thesis. And his way, FDR was like, we're going to put in some more infrastructure here for everybody else. But we have until we'll see what direction we go in now. But I think government has not been particularly helpful for the marketplace. I said it.
I think that's really great. You reminded me of Bastiat, the French economist, and the candle maker's petition. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with this? And again, it's no shame if you're not, because I just heard of it 6 months ago or so.
I'm not.
So the idea was that industry, and the more strategic the industry, the more eloquently they will argue. In this case, it is the French lighting industry and their petition to the French government. So In Basti, I'm just going to go ahead and read this out loud. And if we get a copyright strike, I'll figure out what that is and how to deal with it later. And we'll comment on it. I think we've got to make a commentary on it in order for it not to be, copyright infringement. In Basti,
this makes it a reaction video. The kids do this all the time, and it grips copyright. Yeah. They even monetize it.
Exactly. So forgive me, YouTube, or whoever else this ends up seeing, but we're going to comment on this. In Bastiat's petition, all the people involved in the French lighting industry, including the manufacturers of candles, tapers, lanterns, sticks, street lamps, snuffers, and extinguishers, and from producers of tallow, oil, resin, alcohol, and generally of everything connected with lighting, call upon the French government to take protective action against unfair competition from the sun. It argues sarcastically, we candle makers are suffering from the unfair competition of a foreign rival. It argues that forcing people to close all windows, dormers, skylights, inside and outside shutters, curtains, casements, bullseyes, deadlights, and blinds, in short, all openings, holes, chinks, and fissures through which the light of the sun is wont to enter houses will lead to a higher consumption of candles, naturally, and related products. In turn, they reason the industries that those in the lighting industry depend on for materials will have greater sales, and will their dependent suppliers, and so on, until everyone is better off without the sun. Now, I think that's
good.
That's just really good. That's Bastiat for you. And in his commentary to advance Adam Smith's arguments against mercantilism, essentially it was, if we allow the mercantilist point of view to persist at all, we're going to have stuff like this to deal with. We're going to have the candle makers telling our government, the people with the monopoly on violence, remember, that we must close up all our windows in order to protect, our industry from the competition of a foreign rival, the sun.
A modest proposal, as Jonathan Swift might have put it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, some of these particularly good polemics, like that's an awesome polemic. It identifies the sort of the outer reach of an argument. It's instruction and education through absurdism, which I adore. But some of our, we started talking about what do we see changing in the macro environment in 2022. And, I brought up China, and more particularly the Chinese Communist Party. One of the reasons we've done so much business with China in the last 30 years, the strategic thought in international affairs and national security in about 1988-90 was there's going to be the rise of a strategic competitor in the Pacific. Guess which one? We can either defend against them or integrate and partner with them. And one probably involved.
This is Kissinger's argument. This is basically Kissinger's argument to Nixon.
Yeah. And that's a good idea. That's a coherent thought. So the externalities in that were or should have been, and what shall we become at the end of all that? Now, I can say, having counseled executives on this very matter 22 years ago, I asked some executives from a consumer packaged good company who were just very excited about doing business with China and how having access to their markets. And there was what we called Chinese math, which is if you get 1% of this marketplace, it's 1 billion people. That's a lot of people. That's right. 1% of the lot is a lot. That's correct. But I started asking some uncomfortable questions like, how many people are you going to have on staff in your executive team that speak Mandarin? Well, why would we do that? Well, because that's what the Chinese speak. Well, but everyone speaks English. Yes, but not everybody prefers it, and there's some information you might want to glean. If you're going to do zillions of dollars of business with a group of people, you ain't going to have nobody who knows what they're saying? You're not going to know how to read their newspaper at all? I mean,
Or notice when
that just seemed.
or notice when the translation in your headphones is different from what's actually said, because I've been there many times. Every time I've been to China, the translation is different coming to my headphones than what is being spoken from the dais.
It's funny how I will, some people ask, how many languages do you speak? And I say quite a few, because there is a great benefit in being able to obscure the fact that you're taking in information that people don't know you're taking in, right? But as a linguist and who's operated in the field based on foreign language capabilities, it's so basic. Of course, there's stuff in the other person's language that doesn't translate directly or that you got to know about. And that was the thing. These executives, I mean, these are people with MBAs or just very savvy people in general. And they're like, well, why would we need to speak their language? It's like, because you're talking about having 10 to 20 to 30% of your annual revenue come from them. It was just such naivete. And it was like, what do you, and I would ask a follow-up question. What do you think they're going to want from you? Well, what do you mean? It's like, this is China. Have you not read their history? I will understand if you haven't read all of it, because there's more than 2,000 years of it to get through. But you might notice that they have been on the bleeding edge of medicine, science, chemistry, mechanical stuff, manufacturing, government. The notion of a complex government and a professional bureaucratic class. They've been in the vanguard of that for more centuries than most of our countries have been around. Do you think, and have you met them? They call themselves the Middle Kingdom. They call themselves the center of the earth. Do you really think, this is year 2000. I was young enough. I, of course, didn't get this exercised. Interesting. I could ask a couple questions and listen to the responses in the room and be like, this is a problem. This is like, really, you don't think they want anything from you? They're a nation state with 1 billion people that has traditionally been the regional, at least the regional hegemon in terms of power and influence and having satellite states that calls itself the center of the world, and you don't think they want something from you? Think they're a little still sore about the Opium War or how the United Kingdom, how the British Empire treated them? You don't think they're sore with our friends, the Japanese? Have you not read about Manchuria and what they did there? And how, and we back the Japanese regime up? You don't think there's any complexity about that? And they're like, nope, if you get 1%, that's 1 billion. There's a lot. Yeah. So here we are in 2022, and now we find out that the assumptions of, well, we'll just engage with them. It's like, yeah, but are they going to sell people's organs in Xinjiang? Are you going to get supply chain from people that may be revealed to be, historic human rights abusers? Or you just, for as much as you talk about freedom and democracy and economic freedom, are you going to be that integrated with the totalitarian regime? And let's get to a really pertinent question here. Are you going to sell them product, help them create a surveillance society? Because that's something that has been, instantly explored here. As you know, Huawei, ZTE, Hikvision, many other Chinese regime-associated technology companies have been sanctioned. They've been banned from integration in the U.S. Department of Defense. Other NATO countries are doing this thing. Lithuanians are taking all their Chinese phones and throwing them in the river and stuff. And the U.S. Treasury Office of Foreign Asset Control has been going one company right after the other there. So we're all about, looking at this Chinese stuff. But if you go back to the 2000s, when I was looking at this, and Golden Shield, which was their initial cut at creating these databases and unifying, facial recognition or camera footage, if nothing else, and then keeping track of citizens and the golden firewall and all of that. They didn't have the manufacturing capacity to make that infrastructure. Who provided it to them? Oracle, Microsoft, HP, and others. And did they turn the switches on and write the code of, we're going to track this citizen around? Probably not. But did they know what that was for? Someone in there did. And in any event, they were part of the supply chain. So our tech sector helped China pioneer all this surveillance technology stuff. And now we're like, oh my gosh, this 5G, infrastructure that's, filled with Huawei gears, turns out it's a very large espionage collection system. Well, no kidding. But, who helped him with the prototype, guys? Mm-hmm. So, lest this become a chauvinistic, that country's bad, this country's good, I would say offhand, I don't know that much about every other country. I know about ours. I know we have a lot of ideals that we fail to live up to. So I've got plenty of criticism for my own country. But in any event, we are running into a hard stop here with cooperation with some of these countries. Russia is on pins and needles now, waiting to see when we're going to throw them out of the banking system and enact other sanctions over their behavior, and China's apparently following along. So much supply chain and value chain, interaction, plus the, what could happen if that becomes a kinetic conflict in 2022? As the Russian nation is lined up on the Ukrainian border right now as we speak, and we are having very regular diplomatic calls with that country's government, and we have offered a complete commitment. And, that portends some of this theoretical and values-based difference may turn into kinetic action. Might be blowing stuff up, putting warheads on foreheads, And if you're in business, and you ain't looking at that.
Yep.
If there's an extra net out for, that might be one.
So we've established semiconductors and tech, I think there. Other industries on my own personal watch list, and then we got to tie this off. One of the things I want us to get into here as we sort of scale this up is that our first half hour or so is the public stream, and then we go private at about 9 o'clock or so to talk about the stuff that we'd get canceled for, or the reading alouds of copyright, other people's copyrights, etc. And I think that's, by the way, one of the big trends that you'll see in social media and media in general is there will be these private enclaves where people will retreat to so that they're less observable. And I intend to industrialize that, by the way. I'm building a business around that to help people to do that in a more trustworthy and confident way. And by the way, this is all part of that project known as Open Recon. Open Recon is the platform where you can build those private enclaves, where you can talk about what you really want to talk about and not what will get you canceled in the public sphere. So that said, I want to start testing this out a little bit in the next couple of weeks. I don't think we have to do it this week, but soon. I'd like to kind of suggest that I hesitate to call it healthcare, but I'm going to call it, for purposes of debate, the medical industrial complex. In the 1950s, Eisenhower referred to the national security the military industrial complex, so to speak, as being a security problem for our nation. And that a lot of what was happening around American power projection into the global bipolar world of the Soviet Union and those who ideologically ascribed to what the Soviets were pushing versus the free world, the West, so to speak, and that whole point of view, that created a bipolarity that I think we see reemerging now in the post 20th century multipolar world, where there really is the one belt, one road, and everybody else. And one belt, one road, by the way, is very much demographically driven. Ye Dai Yi Lu, I think is the Mandarin. Yi Dai Yi Lu is specifically designed to help China cope with its demographic problem. They need to import people into China in order for China's economic miracle to be believable in the next 25 years or so, because by the end of the decade, they don't have the people to allow that economic miracle to continue. And in fact, I heard just the other day that China's overtaking of the U.S. economy has been pushed back to 2033 now. Apparently, it was a couple of years earlier than that, they say. But because of the pandemic, that has delayed China's supremacy over the U.S. in terms of the world's largest economy. Now, that notwithstanding, there's a whole lot of demographic reasons why past performance is not indicative of future returns. In specifically the Chinese context, as you talked about earlier, 20 years ago, there were a lot of executives saying 1% of a billion. And sorry, guys, you haven't looked ahead to what is really about to happen. And that's a part of the problem that we're going to have to figure out from an HQ point of view. Humility quotient is based on your ability to project results beyond your role as the authoritarian actor. There's an old Greek proverb, I don't know who said it, but they say it's Greek, that all progress is based on people planting trees under whose shade they will not sit. And this notion that a limited, ability to appreciate the future based on our own lifespan and the changes that we expect across our lifespan, that's really what humility is about, I think, when it comes to leadership. And for leadership to really be committed to their stakeholders, the leader must look past their own death, or at least past their own demise in the role in which they've been invested, in order to think about what's best for the stakeholders who have to deal with their choices today, the sacrifices and selections that they're making on their behalf, because they've been entrusted with that power. We as a citizenry here in the United States have entrusted government, politicians, and the judiciary with the projection of our collective power. And we've established, I think, in the last few days that those incentives are out of whack with our desired outcomes, largely, and it's getting worse. I think that's what I hope this show can be a little bit, is a bit of an antidote, to try and turn that trend back on itself and just really shine light on it, show people that what they are believing is only partially true. And there's a lot of other true statements that will negate, challenge, or at least recalibrate the choices that they've made based on those official narratives. So take us home, Eric. Final remarks, and then let's call it a day.
Well, final remark there is, man, I hope tomorrow we talk about the information consumer environment as being a largely controlled market that is more interested in narrative generation than it is narrative description of events, and where intelligence is the antidote to that.
I love it.
In other words, we gonna crap on corporate media.
Kathy Gray, by the way, in the YouTube chat says echo in response to what we just got done talking about there. So Kathy, I look forward to meeting you. Thanks for joining us on these live streams, and I know you're friendly with Eric, and I'm excited to get an introduction here soon. So thank you, Kathy. Well, Eric, thank you for being here. Let's come back and talk about that. Let's make that our topic for tomorrow. We'll continue with this whole industry agenda 2020 throughout the week. There's a whole lot more besides semiconductors and tech and the medical industrial complex that we're going to need to tackle. But those are two really good examples that we could apply your what would you call that? The manufactured narrative? Come up with some verbiage for that topic so that we can trend it.
The narrative industrial complex.
The narrative industrial complex, also known as the cabal between mainstream media, I'll say government, for lack of a better word, bureaucracy, and those who stand to lose as a result of their oligopolies. How about that one?
We need to do some copywriting on it. Absolutely.
I think we should.
All right, man. Done.
Thank you, brother.
Bye, bro.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see
Have a good
you
day.
back here tomorrow at 8:30 Central Time to close the distance, and appreciate it.
Yep.
Happy New Year.